Hello everyone, my name is Matthew and this is
Yazga.
And we are your head interview TAs for this semester. Quickly, the point of this video is we want to go over a few reminders for interviews and to do a pseudo interview setup so you guys can sort of get a sense of what an interview will look like. And we'll also go over a couple different kinds of answers to give you guys a sense of what a good or bad interview answer is. And then we'll do a quick couple reminders right at the end, and you guys should be all good to go for interviews. So remember that interviews are happening on week 13 from Monday, November 17th to November 21st. You should attend your normal lab time, and during that time, depending on the size of your lab, you may have a few additional TAs. A TA will call you up by name. You will come sit down with a TA. They'll have their laptop or device open, and basically their whole job is to transcribe pretty much word for word what your answer is for an interview question. The interview, again, is designed to be 10 minutes, so expect a few questions. And again, the TAs will do their best to nudge you in the right direction if you aren't answering the question the way we expect through follow-ups. So don't feel uncomfortable or feel like you're doing poorly if you're receiving follow-ups. It is just a way for us to make sure you guys are on track and we give you guys the best opportunity to address the question.
Before we get started though, a few more reminders about the interviews is that remember that the interviews are assessments designed to address your technical communication skills. So basically you will be elaborating on the concepts that we have covered over the course through programming assignments or coding quizzes. And another thing is that if you need a scrap paper to explain your thought process a little bit more clearly to the TA, you can also ask for that. And at the same time, please keep in mind that, as Matthew mentioned, that your TAs are there to transcribe. So a TA might not be making eye contact when you are giving out your answers, and that's not necessarily because your answer is wrong, or it's not necessarily because your TA is being rude to you or dismissing you, but it's mainly because they're transcribing and they're trying to catch your answers. Awesome. So now we will be getting started with the interview process, and this will be a mock interview between me and Matthew. I'll be acting as Matthew's TA, and Matthew is a CSE116 student. So hi Matthew.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Awesome. So if you're ready, we will get started with your interview process.
Ready when you are.
Okie dokie. My first question for you is, could you tell me, give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. Okie dokie. So could you tell me what would happen if a linked list's last node's next reference pointed to the head of the list?
So if the tail node's next pointer points back to the head node, then the list will form a closed loop or a closed circle. If you were trying to travel or traverse the list using the usual null checks we do when we use recursion or a while loop, then we would enter an infinite loop and a stack overflow or some sort of timeout error would occur. Mm-hmm. So that would break a lot of our coding assignments that we have done in class.
Okie dokie. Perfect. Moving on to the next question. Okay, let's pause here. Matthew's answer was one of the accurate answers that we were shooting for or looking for. Matthew, would you like to elaborate on why it was good?
Yeah, so this answer was very, very strong, and it isn't typically expected of students to go that up and beyond. But what makes that answer really strong is that the response A first directly addresses the question. The question was asking what would happen if the tail pointed back to the head, and I directly addressed that. I didn't mince my words. I didn't try to jump around the question. I directly said what the result would be, right? On top of that, I also then explained application. I didn't just think about the question, I thought about what this would mean in the greater scope of things. So for example, in my answer, I talked about how it relates to the coding assignments that you guys have been used to doing all semester, where I said, okay, this would break a lot of the code that we're using because most of the code we use using linked list relies on null checks to know when we reach the end. And now those checks wouldn't work, right? And again, the question can be answered without using a lot of technical language, but because I felt comfortable using the technical language as a student, I was able to very accurately use that language to answer the question.
So, Matthew, if you're ready, I will get you started with your interview.
Sounds good.
Could you tell me what would happen if a linked list's last node's next reference pointed to the head of the list?
So I think that would cause an infinite loop. When traveling the linked list, we would not know when to stop or when we landed on every node because
Just a second, could you repeat that again, please? When traveling a...
So when we're traveling a linked list,
Mm-hmm.
we would not know when to stop or when we made it to every single node because we would just keep repeating the same cycle.
Okie dokie. Alright, awesome. Moving on to the next question. Matthew's answer was a great answer because it structurally addressed the core of the concept about linked lists and references and how we know nodes are connected in a linked list. Is there anything else you would like to add, Matthew?
So again, the reason this is still a great answer, but it isn't quite perfect like the previous response, is because, right, it directly addresses the question. It's very accurate in the way it addresses the question, but it doesn't go outside that scope, right? It doesn't show how the thinking reaches beyond just the actual question and think about like the context of the course or the context of what we learned or just like things outside that question in itself. Also important to note, just from the interview perspective, Yazga told me to pause for a second so she could catch up with what I was saying. Do expect something like that. Again, writing something, typing something is going to be slower than talking, so don't feel like you're doing anything wrong if we ask that, right? Mm-hmm. And additionally, right, note that the great answer did not use a lot of technical language. The only language that we could consider technical is infinite loop or cycle, but I still was able to very strongly convey that I understood what would happen with just using normal everyday English, right? So don't feel like this is testing your technical vocabulary. This is testing your ability to on the spot sort of get a question, understand the core concept of the question, and then expand upon it in a meaningful discussion.
Okay, so let's get started, Matthew.
Okay.
Could you tell me what would happen if a linked list's last node's next reference pointed to the head of the list?
It would cause an infinite loop.
Okay, so could you elaborate why would that happen?
Well, because when we're looking at lists, we expect the last node to point to nothing, to point to null. But now, since our linked list doesn't have that anymore, it would break our normal code.
Could you repeat that last part again, after the last node's next reference to be null?
So because we don't have that null anymore, it would break all our normal code because we don't know when the list ends.
You said our normal code. What's really normal code?
Well, in our homework code, when we're working with linked lists, the way we know when to stop is when we're writing a loop, we would look for null as the next as next equals null. So because we no longer have a null to look for, our code would no longer work.
Okay, okay. Awesome. Now moving on to the next question.
Okay, so that was an okay answer that through TA follow-ups was made into a great answer, right? So if you as a student just answered that question with it would cause an infinite loop, although you are factually correct, it is your explanation and your actual engagement with the question is not sufficient for us to give you a pass on that question. So again, as students, you don't know what we're looking for necessarily with each question, so that's why the TA follow-ups exist. Yazga began asking me leading follow-on questions using the exact language that I used in my responses to try to pull more out of me, right? And through the 2 follow-ups that she used, she was able to pull out of me information that I knew that I was comfortable talking about. I just did not know how to express it appropriately in the interview context, right? So again, the follow-ups are there to help you.
And an important thing to consider here is that getting a lot of follow-up questions from your TA is not necessarily a bad sign, but if your whole interview is reliant on the TA asking follow-up questions, then that might be a shaky situation to be in. Okay. So Matthew, are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. So here's my question for you. What would happen if a linked list's last node's next reference pointed to the head of the list?
It would cause a problem in our code.
Okay. Could you elaborate what kind of problem?
I think it would cause Java or IntelliJ to give us an error.
Java or IntelliJ to cause an error. Okay.
Yeah.
But I understand where you're coming from. And could you be more specific about this error? What kind of error would that be?
Well, the linked lists are designed to use null. So because we don't have a null, it would cause an error.
They use null. And you say that if no null, there's an error.
Yeah.
Okay. Why specifically would that cause an error? How do we use null?
Well, because in the slideshows we were taught to use null to know when to use null to stop when we're trying to add something to the end of the list.
Okay. So you basically said that, reiterating your statement, you're saying that because it's in the slides, but what's the purpose of the null then?
The null,
besides it being in the slides.
The null is there to tell us that there's nothing after the node that has null.
Is there to tell us there's nothing after? Okay, so in that case, right now, not having a null as the next reference in our linked list, how does that cause an issue?
It would cause, and at this point I think it's a good place to stop. So at some point the TA, Yazgi was very liberal, she tried to give me as many follow-ups as possible to try to get me in the right direction, but it was very clear that I wasn't giving her enough detail, or I was just, saying things that I saw on the slides that I memorized without really addressing the question. So after that follow-up, no matter what I said, even if I, did not get to the final answer of the question, that would cause a cycle and it would cause an infinite loop if we used our class assignment code. Yazga would just move on, because again, as the interviewer, she's not supposed to disclose any information about how well you are doing. And because, again, there are time constraints, right? The interview is designed to be 10 minutes and there's a lot of students in certain labs. There's a reason we do things like that.
But with that said, keep in mind that it's totally okay in your interview to say, for example, math, in this case, we just we're answering one question. But let's say that you're asked a question and the answer, you know the answer, but the words don't directly come out of your mouth in that case. It's totally okay to say, oh, can I come back to this question?
Yeah.
And in that case, you can totally go back to the question with your interviewer later on, or you can revisit a question if you have time left over.
Yeah, exactly. The interview time, you're allotted 10 minutes if you feel that you want to go back to re-answer a question, or you want some sort of clarifying question. Again, feel free to do that. Let's now discuss the actual answer in its content. Nothing, if you were really paying attention to what I was saying, nothing that I said was wrong. Everything that I was saying was factually right based off things you've learned in this course. However, I was skidding around the question. I wasn't addressing the question directly, and I was just, even when Yazga was using her follow-ups, I was still giving very short sentences, trying to be as minimal as possible, which is not something that helps, right? You want to be concise in your response, but we also are really looking for if you're thinking about the question, right? If you're actually analyzing the context of the question and not just being I memorized the slides, let me just spit them back out at you. As long as you are showing an initiative and an attempt to analyze the question, that is better than just memorizing the slides and giving them back to us, right? Yazga tried her best to use the follow-ups effectively to support me, but I, as a student, was not doing my due diligence and maybe not knowing the material well enough, or just not answering her questions accurately. Do not rely on follow-up questions as a means to fish information out of a TA, right? Again, remember, you're allowed to ask the TA to reword the question or to clarify something, but it's at the TA's discretion to do so, to not reveal too much information about what we expect the answer to be. So in that same vein, that's the same thing applies to fishing for follow-ups. At some point, if the TA is noticing that you're just waiting for follow-ups and just giving one-sentence answers, the TA will simply move on to the next question because it shows that you aren't actually engaged with the question. At that point, I hope that was useful. You got to see 4 different questions, or you got to see the same question answered in 4 different ways, with a perfect answer, or the exceeds expectations answer, the up and away answer, a great answer, which is typical and what we would expect for the interview, a sort of okay answer that through using the follow-ups was built into a great answer, and then sort of a poor response where, although everything I said was true, I wasn't engaging with the question accurately.
Also, please utilize your office hours for interview help, because this is an important assessment and you will basically have the chance to do this on week 13 and during the final time to make up for it if you need to. So with that said, stakes are high with it, and please utilize office hours to get some help with interviewing skills.
Yeah, again, just a few friendly reminders right at the end. We do not require you to get every question 100% correct, or even if you get one question and you're just pretty inaccurate, as long as you're showing that engagement, showing that understanding, and showing that you're trying with the question, we will be way more lenient to students like that than a student who just says a flat out wrong answer and doesn't try to elaborate. So again, we are looking for an understanding and application, not memorized slideshow bullets, right? We are looking for you being comfortable discussing the concepts that you learned in this course in you context, right? We're trying to not necessarily surprise you, but to sort of challenge you a little bit. And again, we're looking if you're able to talk with some degree of comfort, right? Again, you don't need technical language. You just need to engage the question accurately and to the best of your ability. And then again, if you have any questions or concerns, please bring them up as soon as possible, either in office hours or on Piazza. Thank you so much, everyone. Good luck on interview week. We're all rooting for you.
Thank you.